The terror attack on an evacuation convoy in Syria's Aleppo province likely amounts to a war crime. That's according to the UN Human Rights Office. The explosion killed almost 150 people, most of them children. Horrific details of the blast have emerged throughout the week as survivors and witnesses recount their stories.
كانت تقتل المسلحين اللي مرقوا منا ما هي
نفس نقطة المسلحين
واعترضوا
عليهم المسلحين قالوا لهم منو انتم قالوا لهم نحن
العالم انا كنت موجود جنب الفان يقول له هذاك الثاني يعطيه اكل للكليب صار يشيل بالبطاطا ويشرب فيك والاولاد الصغار كلها محرومين من هالاكل هذا
يلا طريق
الحمد على السلامة حبيبي.
نيلو عمو حمد على السلامة. نيلو عمو حمد على السلامة.
أخيلة الضحكة معنا. منيحة أنت يا عمري.
نيلو أنا شهودة نيلو.
Already, by the time they arrived at Rashdin, they were traumatized, psychologically traumatized, on top of the besiege, the siege that they lived through for the previous 2 years.
الجوع، موت الأطفال من الجوع، الصواريخ، القذائف، صواريخ الفيل، مدارس ما في، كهرباء ما في، ماء ما في، نحن قبلنا بهالوضع.
The next day we actually went to Jibrin Registration Center to speak to the survivors of that attack, and what I heard was just absolutely horrendous. We've just witnessed one of the most heinous crimes of our lifetime, actually. I can't even find the words to describe it or to try and describe the pain that these people must have gone through.
حالة ذعر وحالة خوف والله إن شاء الله ما بتنذكر ما بقى بتنعاد.
The evacuation convoy was taking civilians from pro-government villages surrounded by rebel factions. These photos show the moments right before the attack. Survivors eventually made it to safety after the evacuation resumed under a swap deal struck by various opposition members and the government. Those who were there have been describing what happened, as Elysee reports.
Each second feels like an age. Ghada asks a passerby if he's seen her anxiously awaited son. Minutes later, he's back in her arms. Ahmed's mum too cries tears of relief. He was lucky to survive.
It was horrific. Everything was on fire. People were burned alive. In the front buses, there were a lot of dead people.
For Ahmed and Mohammed, it's a painful homecoming. Every other makeshift apartment here has an empty space.
My heart is broken. My wife and daughter are missing.
We lived for 2 days on one loaf of bread. We could face the hunger, but the children were crying. We waited for 2 days. The hunger was killing them.
Many are simply waiting for the rebels to give back the bodies of their loved ones, those who didn't survive the brutal sieges of Fua and Kafraya.
The massacre's coverage in several media outlets, as William Whiteman now explains, could be deemed heavily biased.
The media took a far less belligerent tone when covering a suicide car bomb attack on mostly Shia pro-government townspeople west of Aleppo. As well as a tragedy, CNN went as far as describing this, the killing of over 150 people, mainly civilians, as a hiccup.
The evacuation process is continuing despite this, you would say, hiccup but disastrous moment.
Instead of actually directly pointing the finger at extremist elements among the rebels, the main culprit was instead, it seems, the war itself.
Dozens of supporters of President Bashar al-Assad are the latest victims of Syria's brutal civil war.
Both sides have been stuck in a no-man's land with a conflict of emotions.
The BBC went one step further by suggesting that this was perhaps the work of the Syrian government. According to the Beeb, there's no evidence that the rebels were involved in the attack. It's unclear how the vehicle filled with explosives got into rebel territory near Aleppo without government permission. The bombing would not be in the rebels' interest, apparently. If that's the case, then why did rebels film this video after they burned government buses sent to evacuate people from the exact same towns a few months ago?
الباصات التي أتت لنقل الروابط تم حرقها بفضل الله تعالى. الله
The BBC features that same video on their website, although the audio is conveniently missing. This latest bombing killed at least 68 children. The suicide bombers reportedly lured the hungry youngsters in with snacks before setting off the blast. While the regime and its allies are certainly guilty of waging a brutal air campaign, does this kind of suicide attack sound like the work of the government? It doesn't take an expert to know that the rebels are not a single entity, but are instead made up of many groups, each with different goals, including Sunni extremists for whom the massacring of predominantly Shia townspeople is indeed of interest. But none of that information really goes with the whole binary mainstream narrative the media are spinning, so why would they think to mention it?
A whole load of really awkward, difficult questions have to be asked by journalists, have to be asked by the White House and Pentagon and Trump's people, which is what exactly is the relationship between the Trump administration and these groups, these opposition groups who are responsible for these massacres, like al-Nusra or others in that area. You know, those are the sort of questions which journalists aren't asking and Trump isn't prepared to answer. But that, for me, is really the core of this issue.
The Weekly continues here on RT International in just a moment.